Behold, my glorious supporter, isn't that right? Asks to discuss Pyre played with a Warframe loadout. Allow me to explain. Isn't that right? Asks Captain. In light of your Pyre stream kicking off in February, I had the thought that there's parallels to your Necramech, Warframe, and Operator. What I want from you is a bit of fleshing out regarding how you'd implement a handful of Warframe characters into Pyre. There's a few different questions here. Let's begin by establishing the premise. In Pyre, there's a lot of things, but the challenge gameplay loop is basically 3-on-3 basketball, except you can only control one of your 3 units at once. So if you could play it head-to-head multiplayer or just against the AI, and either way you can only control one unit and you swap between them. You can pass the ball to swap between them, or you can just switch control. Or I guess if you have the ball. Anyway, you can only control one at once. This is really similar in a very strange way, to how in Warframe you have your Warframe, but your Warframe is controlled by your operator. And so if you go into operator mode, your Warframe is usually inactive. Excalibur Umbra, but anyway, whatever. Forget about that for now. And then your Necramech, you can summon it, but it's controlled by your operator, so you can go Warframe or Operator or Necramech. What's really happening is that your operator is either out on the battlefield or in your Warframe or in your Necramech, but whatever, basically you can control one of the 3 units at once. So they could be a triumvirate in Pyre. What a delightful idea. And so then you said a bit of fleshing out regarding how you'd implement a handful of Warframe characters into Pyre. There's a lot of ways you could take that. What I'm going to start with is by making 3 characters in Pyre that are your Necramech, Warframe, and Operator. So what does a character in Pyre need? Well, they have a size of their aura, they have stats, they have an amount of damage they deal when they dunk or shoot, they have an amount of speed, stamina, they have a way they move, we'll get back to that later, they have an amount of time it takes them to return if they get killed or banished, and they have a size of their aura, right? So we need those things and then special qualities. Now, I don't think I'm going to be able to figure out full skill trees for Necramech, Warframe, and Operator, but I'll dabble, right? I just simply don't know the ones in Pyre well enough like the back of my hand to avoid being redundant, but we'll give it a try. The Necramech, of course, is going to be a larger unit. The Warframe is probably a medium-sized unit, and your Operator should probably be a small-ish unit. So I'm thinking of the Necramech being similar to Jodariel, who has a really, really big aura, the area she defends when trying to block people from getting the ball. And her aura cast, her sort of attack where she throws out her aura, is real big. It's really wide, it goes fairly far. It's kind of slow. The Necramech, I think, should not have stamina. I think that rather than sprinting or not, it should just go to constant speed, which is steady but not very fast. I mean, I like the idea of the Necramech having a little aura while it's moving. So normally in Pyre, your aura, which can hurt people and banish them, or be used to defend yourself, is gone while you're holding the ball. It would be pretty unique to have the Necramech retain a bit of aura while holding the ball. This doesn't make you invincible, it just means that people can't just run right up to you and take the ball. They would have to shoot their aura at you. And of course, by contrast, the Necramech will be unable to sprint, so you can't as easily avoid people aura casting, right? What the Necramech can do, of course, is hover. Yes, there are a few characters in Pyre already that rather than jumping to jump over auras, to jump into the hoop and dunk, or whatever, just for mobility, can hover or fly in some way. Tizo, and of course we have Ametha. The harps and the drive imps are able to fly. And so it'd be interesting to have the Necramech be able to hover, and it's got an amount of hovering. Of course, it has stamina, it just won't use that to sprint. And hovering, of course, leaves you free to avoid the auras of enemies that are trying to auracast at you. The trouble, of course, is that the Necramech is slow, and so it's easy enough to either intercept it in the air by jumping, you can do that in Pyre, or by simply waiting until the Necramech runs out of stamina. And if they wanted to just hover into the goal, you could, of course, jump and shut them down, but they would have to get pretty close. And so generally, the trade-off with the Necramech is that you, the opponent, you have to commit more to stopping the Necramech, because it's got that initial aura you need to stop and aura cast, and then it can jump, and then you'd have to slap it down. But on the other hand, the Necramech has to do a lot more work to actually dunk the ball. Like Jadariel, I think the trade-off here should be that the Necramech does a lot of damage if you can get a point with it, but it's not going to be able to get there. Like, a competent player is going to be able to stop you. What this type of unit is often good for, then, is something Jadariel is not as great for, in my opinion, which is getting the ball up the field. In Pyre, a sort of basic aspect of strategy is kind of like in chess, where you want a positional advantage. So you want to do a thing that elicits a response from your opponent that results in your team overall being further up the field, because then if you pass the ball, then swap to a different character, you're going to be further up, and that character is more of a threat. And then if you rush them up a bit and then pass, your opponent has to think, okay, so this unit has the ball, but this unit really close to my goal is a problem. Maybe I should divert attention to stop them. Oh, but they're going to score. And then if you have another unit that's all the way up there, it's very difficult to stop the player from getting a point. Because even if you try to stop their units further up the field so that they can't pass to them and easily score, they have two, and so you can only control one character at once, so you pretty much got it. So a unit like the Necramech that I'm designing would be powerful in that it would let you advance on the field a little more reliably and force your opponent to pay attention to the Necramech unit. That could be really cool. Maybe there could even be a talent tree for the Necramech unit that allows it to continue hovering for a few seconds after you pass the ball away from it. This would mean that you really need to ask your opponent to commit a lot. It's easy enough to aura cast and banish the Necramech, even though it's got that aura. You can't just run into it and banish it with the ball. But it's easy enough to just aura cast. Jumping, though, you got to run right up to it and then jump and hit it out of the air. It would be difficult. And so it would be powerful to have the ability to let it hover and idle in midair for a little bit, keeping it a bit safe. This would contribute to the playstyle of having everything move up the field together. Might be a little overpowered. I'm not sure. We'll see. It's probably also worth mentioning, I'm not sure if along the way I'll come up with every character in Pyre has a signature talisman. They have talent trees where they get 4 points among 8 talents on 2 trees, and they also get a talisman. So the buildcraft is really slimmed down, but it's also very, very dense. Each thing you pick, there are very few things you pick, but each thing you pick makes a very big difference. So you might be thinking the ability to just hover when you swap off, that's ridiculous. That's what a lot of them are like. I mean, I do think that's powerful, but it's probably worth mentioning that I stream this if you are interested in what I'm talking about and you want to watch it. I've been streaming it every Monday, starting around 4 or so Eastern Standard Time. So, the Necramech, there we are. The Warframe. Well, this should be a more medium unit. I'm thinking like Hedwyn. Hedwyn is your sort of standard character, very standard size aura, well-rounded stats, and he has a tree of talents that is basically about helping the team. While he's on the team, everybody gets more stamina, everybody, recovers faster, or does more damage to the enemy Pyre, or whatever. The Warframe, then, will be a unit like Hedwyn in that it's kind of a straight shooting, normal sprint, rounded stats, but is going to be more selfish. Hedwyn is a pretty selfless character. He can be made to do something other than that, a selfless tree, but we're going to make the Warframe a much more selfish unit. In fact, as a sort of one-man army, I think it'd be interesting to give the Warframe advantages if you do not pass the ball. The Warframes, after all, are the sort of David and Goliath war machines of the Orcan Empire. Warframes don't pass. You're a ninja, for goodness sakes. The way of the shinobi has no meaning anymore. So we're going to give the Warframe a talent tree that gives you benefits if you do not pass, or like the longer you have the ball, maybe something like this. Every 2 seconds that you don't pass the ball while your Warframe is holding it, you do 1 more damage to the enemy's Pyre. That's pretty significant. If that was in the game, that would be worth considering at the very least. And of course, the drawback here is the Warframe has quite average movement stats, so it may be a little challenging to keep away from opponents, but it'd be somewhat okay. Probably we should make the Warframe speed on the high side and good at jumping. We can do a bullet jump. Yeah. Okay, so we should have it be you can get a double jump. How do we do a bullet jump? There are characters that have double jumps. I'm trying to think what you do about a bullet jump. Maybe you have to slide somehow? Is it, because you slide and then jump? That's how you do a bullet jump. I'm trying to think. Maybe instead of a double jump, it should be something like, ooh, okay, so how about this? So in Pyre, you can, rather than dunking, you can shoot the ball. You hold down the button and throw it. The advantage here, it's quite vulnerable. You have to stay still. It's pretty slow, usually. But the advantage is that when you dunk in Pyre, the game has a kind of balancing mechanic where the character that dunked is gone for the next round until the next point is scored. So if we're 3-on-3, I dunk with one of my units and score on you and get some damage on your Pyre. That unit I dunked with is gone, and now it's 2-on-3. So you're behind, but you have a manifest advantage. It's now 3-2. Now you can only control one unit at once, but there's still a huge positional advantage to having 3 chess pieces to move around rather than 2, right? If you dunk the ball, you lose your unit. If you shoot the ball, though, it's a lot harder because you're very vulnerable while doing it, but you don't get banished. You do less damage, it's very vulnerable, but if you can do it, your character doesn't get banished for that round. So it remains 3-on-3 even though you scored, because you were willing to accept some further challenge. You're handicapping yourself by not dunking in a way, in a lot of situations, right? So there it is. So what if we have a mechanic where when the Warframe goes to shoot, you can jump during the shoot to do a bullet jump, and instead of shooting the ball, you fire yourself on the trajectory that you were going to throw, like really quickly or something. There are characters that have like a leap, sort of. Reminds me a bit of the Savage, who you can name some A name. We named ours Bay on the stream, of course. But the Savage jump. The Savage is very similar to the Nomad, in our case Hedwyn, but your Savage that joins your A named Savage has a sort of delayed leap, but it's really far. They have to like sort of spring forward, but it's real quick. Same thing with the sprint. There's a delay, but then they move faster. So they're kind of like a delayed. They are in a way a more selfish version of Hedwyn, but the way that they're more selfish is that they have high mobility that requires more commitment. They're not overall faster necessarily, but they can be kind of bursty. So I like the idea of a more like, not thinking man's Savage, but the Warframe can have that sort of bullet jump mechanic where if you really line up a shot, then you can do something pretty powerful and dive in. Maybe then we'll give the Warframe something like when you dunk specifically, so we'll reward the Warframe for dunking. You have to aim up a shot and then bullet jump and then dunk. So when you shoot, you dunk. Maybe the Warframe even can't shoot or something like that. But then when you dunk, you do extra damage if you did a bullet jump or something like that. Or maybe if you don't do a bullet jump, that's better. Then you do more damage. I don't know. Something like that. I think that sounds cool. I think it would be cool to give the Warframe a signature trinket. All the characters have a talisman that is unique to them. We could give the Warframe one that's like a cosmetic. It's got to be a fashion frame thing, right? A Syandana, or it could be an arcane, I guess, but that's kind of boring. An arcane helmet, Syandana, or like an ephemera, for example, the particle effecty auras that will do. What will it do? What I was thinking is something like if enemies spend more than a second or two near the Warframe, they get dazed because they're looking at your fashion frame. So if enemies remain near the Warframe in a proximity for more than 1 second, then they get disoriented or something like that. So if people are going to aggress you as the Warframe, if you have this trinket on, they have to commit or they can't, which sounds kind of cool. And finally, the operator. This is fun. The operator will be a somewhat smaller unit, not as small as in Pyre. We have some really tiny units like Sir Gilman and Rookie, and the operator will be not that small, but smaller than Hedwyn and the Savage, something like that. What should the operator's mechanics be? I kind of like the idea of the operators really, really slow. So somewhat like characters like Jadariel, their sprint can just be a dash, but like a longer, more linear, but less controlled dash. So rather than like a little scoot, or like Tizo has the little scoots, I'm talking about like a single, like boom, just straight line dash. The thing that I think of, this is a random reference, in Kirby Air Ride, there's a star that you can ride on that, so the mechanic is it doesn't actually move when you're boosting. You have to boost to stop and then turn and then you let go, and it's fast, but it only goes straight. You have to, just let it go straight, and there's no brakes or whatever. And then if you boost, you can stop and turn it again. And so you have like this geometric racing pattern, which is strange. I remember as a kid, I didn't really like because it was a scrub. And it'd be interesting to have dashes on the operator that are like that, but then the operator is otherwise pretty slow moving. I always think of your operator as being, they don't get out much, and so they're not the most athletic, but they're just powerful, voidy, powerful. The operator, we haven't talked about this too much, aura casting, the way you sort of attack. The Necramech, I was going to mention something about having their aura cast be a sort of Gatling gun, like pow, 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 rather than a single cast, which is most of them just do a wave. And the Warframe should have a normal one, I think. Maybe a fast one, fast and thin, but not too long. So it's more like a sword. I'm imagining Excalibur. For the operator, I think the Aura Blast has got to be your Void Blast, your boop, and then it's a quick in an AoE. So it's fast, it doesn't have good range, but it's got good radius. This is a little bit like Tizo's self-implosion ability, where Tizo can explode himself and explode in a big radius. Not that big a radius, and you don't die. Maybe you get some recoil or something. But I kind of like that idea. I like Tizo's explosion thing. I wish there were more characters like that. So it'd be interesting to have the operator do that. Okay, so there may be a combat character. This is shaping up in the context of Pyre to be a kind of assassin-based unit. They'd be very good at zipping right next to an enemy and using their boop to banish them, or maybe even multiple. And then there should be some cost. They'll do very low pyre damage. Maybe a good balancing thing is they do even lower pyre damage than the really fast units like Rookie and Sir Gilman. They do practically no pyre damage. But then they have some mechanic like if they banish an enemy, so they zip in and do their boop and banish people, then they do extra damage to the enemy's pyre. And the catch there is that because you zipped in and banished enemies, that means you didn't have the ball when you did that. You can't use your Aura Blast when you have the ball. So you would have to get the damage out of this, you have to not have the ball. Your operator and no other character can have the ball. They have the ball. You zip in, banish them, and then if you can quickly get the ball and score, then you do a bit more damage. Not much more, but I think with this character, that would be powerful. This character would be really good for reversals. They have the ball and you manage to stop them, and then this character is quite good at capitalizing on that. But in exchange, you only do the extra damage if you dunk them, so you can't just use this strategy over and over again. I think the operator should also be just unable to shoot the ball, and instead we should give them some other ability. Maybe their amp or something like that. Maybe they could have a cheeky void ability, so instead of shooting, being able to shoot the ball, if you do the shoot button, you can fire your amp, and it doesn't like do damage or anything, but maybe magnetic procs, void procs enemies, and they get that magnetic field, and they could attract to each other or something. I don't know what this would do, but this is just a fun idea. Yeah, I don't know. It sounds fun. This is an interesting idea. It's funny. I was a little slow in the uptake for this idea when I read this. I thought, what do you mean? The Necramech, the Warframe, and how is that similar? Oh, it's like the whole team. It would be really interesting in Warframe to have this game mode, don't you think? If we had something like, imagine Lunaro. Lunaro is already sort of close to being like the thing in Pi. We basically have this in Warframe already. You just don't control all the unit. It's multiplayer. You could make this work. I don't know. It would be very difficult to play Pyre from a third-person perspective. You play Pyre top-down. It would be quite challenging to play it from a third-person perspective because it's so much like chess in that you want the perspective on the board. But that'd be cool. Anyway, it was a fun question. Isn't that right?